The assault on Aleppo, 11 days of bombardment by Syrian government forces have killed hundreds. Can diplomatic efforts to restore a nationwide ceasefire work? And is Russia interested in the political process? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hazem, Sika. It is more than 2 months now since the Syrian government agreed to what was called a cessation of hostilities, effectively a ceasefire brokered by Russia and the United States. Though it was shaky from the start, US Secretary of State John Kerry has said it has had what he called a profoundly positive effect and saved many lives. But any progress seems to have been shattered over the last 11 days or so. Government airstrikes and artillery attacks on rebel-held areas of Aleppo have killed hundreds of people. Syrian rebels are also accused of targeting civilians and attacking a hospital. And now UN envoy Staffan de Mistura is trying to salvage what is left of the truce. He was in Moscow on Tuesday for talks with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. De Mistura says he is optimistic about relaunching the ceasefire.
These recent talks were in a way not helped by the news that we were getting that the cessation hostilities was becoming more and more fragilized. That's why we were still able to come up with some conclusions which, if you read them, are quite interesting in the sense that they have been showing progress, particularly in the first steps of what can be considered common lines on a political transition, which is the key of the future in Syria. Syrian-led, but sponsored and supported by the international community.
Well, let's bring in our guests now for this discussion. Joining me here in the studio is Jean-Marc Rickli. He is an assistant professor at the Department of Defence Studies at King's College London. In Dubai, we have via Skype Samir Iltaki, General Director of the Orient Research Center, and in Moscow, Vladimir Sotnikov, Strategic Analyst in the Institute of Oriental Studies at the Russian Academy of Sciences. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. So, Vladimir Sotnikov, the UN envoy obviously knows that Russia has a vital role to play here because of its close ties to Damascus and the influence it may have on President Assad. But how do you view Russia's commitment to all of this, and in particular their commitment to the political process, which has in recent days been questioned?
Well, actually, I would like to say that Russia's commitment is obvious because thanks to a lot of effort of Russia, these peace negotiations which are ongoing, well, now it's a little bit break in negotiations, direct negotiations between Syrian opposition groups and the representatives of the Bashar al-Assad government. So mostly to the Russian efforts, together with our US partners, this peace process, this political process was viable actually and was launched. So Russia probably, just like no other country, is very much interested in the peaceful settlement of this acute Syrian crisis, which is ongoing for 5 years. And I think that the timely visit of United Nations Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura to Russia is actually showing that, just like Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said, that probably we are just hours ahead from the political decision to stop all the violence and to stop the hostilities and to continue these negotiations in another round of negotiations in Geneva process.
But just to pick up on what you've been saying there, on my initial question about the fact that Russia's commitment to this has been questioned in some quarters, is not the least of which is because of this relentless bombing that we've seen on the rebel-held areas in Aleppo over the last 11 days, which all accounts say have specifically targeted civilians. And we haven't heard very much from Russia on this, on any attempt to kind of temper this. So it almost seems as if, I mean, the question is being asked as to whether Russia is actually green lighting this bombing of Aleppo. Your response to that?
This is a very interesting question you're asking. But as far as I know, actually, the Russian government and the Russian president and Russia actually ordered its grouping of airspace command in Syria to stop any bombing. So Russia hasn't been bombing the positions of the rebels in Syria for, as far as I am concerned, for 3 consecutive days. So that is. Well,
no, I wasn't asking you that Russia specifically
is
involved in this bombing.
Yeah.
My question is more that it's kind of turning a blind eye to what the Syrian regime is doing.
Well, actually, the meaning of your question, as far as I understand, is how long the Syrian regime will be bombing the positions of rebels. But this is actually the two-side story, I would say, because the rebels are bombing Syrian army positions, and the Syrian army positions are bombing the rebels regime. The main thing is, I see it here, is just to stop bombing on both sides and to start sticking to the so-called silence hour or silence period, just for the matter of going to the resuming the peaceful negotiations in Geneva.
Samir Al-Taki, what's your view on this? Do you think that the diplomatic efforts have any prospect of success at this point to bring any kind of a ceasefire in Syria at this point?
Yes, I think that the main interest of the United States now is to fix a ceasefire, but they are not interested at all, both of them, the United States and Russia, in proceeding in the political process. The whole game now is to try to make the Syrian opposition surrender to the pressure from the Russians by military means and through the the nonchalance of the Americans regarding what's going on in Aleppo, just to punish the Syrian opposition and Syrian population because they are not surrendering to the idea of forming a common government with Bashar al-Assad. Practically, Russia doesn't have any leverage in Syria. The only leverage it has is bombarding people. Practically, it wasn't able to force Bashar al-Assad to do anything that is really relevant to the peace process and the political process. Practically, Russia is only, till now, playing the one-side zero-summing game. And by this, I think it cannot add lots to the Syrian conflict. If it decides at a certain moment really to push this forward, this would be understandable. And the other side, I think the Americans themselves are not very much interested in a serious political process. They speak about it as it will take years and years. What they are interested in is the status quo, meaning that they think that the Russians had got what they have. What they want is it is a part of Damascus and the coastal area. The Iranians has what they want, a part of Damascus up to the Lebanese borders. The Israelis do have what they want. They have now a buffer zone of 160,000 Syrian citizens living in an area which they are considering it as a no-fly zone, and nobody now is thinking about ISIS. Nobody is thinking about getting rid of ISIS from Raqqa. So the whole game is to freeze the
just let me, if I could just jump in here for a moment, Samir, and I want to ask you this question about the opposition's position. Their position so far, backed up by the United States and other Western powers, is that there can be no political transition, there can be no solution in Syria that involves Bashar al-Assad, that he has to go no matter what. Is this a position that they should re-examine at some point?
Yes. First of all, I don't think the United States is backing this, because now the United States is speaking that at a certain moment, which means nothing, Bashar al-Assad will be leaving. But I think Bashar al-Assad himself is no more relevant, because he cannot rule Syria in a peaceful way in any way. And if he dies, the conflict will not stop. So the problem is that now what's happening with the freezing, with the ceasefire, is to prolonged a certain situation of division in Syria, where, as I said, this side will have the regime will have a canton ruled by Bashar al-Assad. A part of the opposition will be ruling here and there, and the opposition will be told that whatever you can salvage from ISIS, then take it, and the Kurds will have their part also. So my point is the current situation, trying to freeze it as it is, and not to force Bashar al-Assad to go into a serious negotiation will lead to a complete partition of the country.
All right.
So I think the Syrian opposition now shouldn't continue to stress about Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad is no more relevant. The issue now is how to keep a unified Syria from being divided as it is now.
All right. Jean-Marc Rickli, do you take any cause for optimism from these latest diplomatic efforts?
Well, not really, because if you look at the dynamics of the conflict, I shall disagree with the predecessor in saying that Russia has no leverage on Syria. Quite the opposite, I'd say, because if you look at the intervention of Russia in Syria, definitely was a game changer for the entire dynamics of this conflict. What Russia did was to strengthen Assad in the western part of the country. And what we are witnessing right now is if you want, a sanctuarization of the western part of the country to support the regime. Therefore, Aleppo is definitely key for this sanctuarization before committing into a political process. So what I would say is that we already have a division of Syria between the western part and the eastern part. We have two different operations. The western part is all about Assad's survival and fighting against the anti-Assad coalition. The eastern part of the country is much more about fighting ISIS. The role of the American, is more important there. So in the end, what we are in a current situation where there is an asymmetry between the two parties that benefit Assad regime, that's much more reinforced by the Russian intervention. And therefore, in any political negotiation, what you want to do, you want to enter the negotiation with a position of strength. Therefore, Aleppo is key.
So they're trying to create facts on the ground.
They're creating facts on the ground before committing into resolution 2054. But if that is the case, they manage to control the western part of the country, then the whole gist, if you want, of the resolution can be questioned, because Assad will be so powerful there will be no transition.
There is an argument that says, and we've heard it throughout the last 5 years in the Middle East, when you see what's happened in other areas, in other war-torn countries, that what could come after Assad could be far worse. Complete chaos and a regime far more brutal. Do you think is that a legitimate concern in Syria? Do you think?
I think it is. It's the typical concept of failed states. I think we've seen that in Yemen. We've seen that in Libya. The problem is to recreate a legitimate structure of governance. Now, if you think about what happened over the last 5 years, where the position of the people on the ground has so radicalized, and in a way that was a strategy of Assad from the beginning. The more time the conflict would last, the better he would be, because the position would radicalize. This is exactly what happened. And so now to find a way to get out of this cycle of violence is very difficult, because as you mentioned, the aftermath could be actually much worse than what we had.
Samir Al-Taqi, let me turn back to you on this. Let's just talk about Aleppo itself for a moment, which is where much of the violence has occurred over the last few days. How important is Aleppo strategically in the larger conflict in Syria to both sides?
I think Aleppo is very important strategically, very important economically, symbolically, and demographically. I think this is a very important place. I think the regime will not be able to occupy Aleppo. The regime will be only able to encircle at the moment, because it will be very, very costly to occupy Aleppo. And I think lots will depend on the behavior of the wild card, which is ISIS. ISIS now is beginning to build up alliances with forces within Aleppo and on the borders of Aleppo, because people will be choosing to surrender to ISIS rather than to surrender to Bashar al-Assad. And here, what I meant by that Russians don't have a leverage, I said they don't have a leverage in terms of conflict resolution. They do have a leverage in trying to push the Syrian opposition to complete surrender. Of course, they are using their force, their power in favor of Bashar al-Assad. So my point was about the conflict resolution. And my point here that the situation in Aleppo will just push people toward ISIS. And we make them, we have about 250,000 to 300,000 in Aleppo now, still civilians, and those people will go to extremism, will deepen. We have to decide about the Sunnis in the Arab world. Do we want them to be just to create in Syria now a situation like Palestine, where the Sunnis will be considering themselves, alienated in the Syrian in the system, in the international system? Because here, what we are witnessing in Aleppo is practically an ethnic cleansing of people, and this could be done by the Kurds, could be done by the regime, but this is an ethnic cleansing, and this will create lots of bitterness, and will serve only the most radical people. Yes, I agree that for the current moment, with extreme violence which is exerted on the ground, we should expect a shift toward more extremism according to what's going on vis-a-vis the civilians that are killed.
Well, let's illustrate some of this now to our viewers on the importance of Aleppo. This strategic city has been divided since 2012, and you can see here now a map of it. Syrian government forces controlling the western part of the city, rebels opposed to President Bashar al-Assad controlling the east. Kurdish fighters hold on to two northern districts, and despite the continued fighting, the territorial gains there have been limited on all sides. And now government forces are battling to take back the Castello Road, the last remaining rebel supply route. So the city of Aleppo, as you can see there, very much in a kind of stalemate. And Vladimir Sotnikov, if I can turn back to you on this. The accusation, again, coming from, it has to be said, largely from the West about Russia, is that while it says that it is targeting terrorists, groups like ISIL, when you look at the areas that they have actually hit, there seems to be more of a focus on the other opposition groups, the so-called secular groups, which I know Russia considers to be, in the same category as ISIS. But the accusation is what they're essentially doing is trying to prop up the regime of Assad. Your response to that?
Well, actually, I would like to say that first of all, there should be proofs, that according to because of the Russian bombardments, there is so many casualties among the peaceful population. But I would like to say about another thing. The main thing is that apart from ISIS, and I agree with my esteemed British colleague, that somehow we see that the country could be, strategically speaking, could be divided into two parts, an eastern part and western part. But apart from the ISIS, there are a lot of other jihadist Islamist groups which are actually fighting side by side with ISIS or by themselves against the Syrian government. So I'm just talking about not the bombardment itself, but I'm talking about that it's very hard to say what will be the final outcome of all this Syrian crisis. So the accusation is not new on Russia, that Russia is bombarding the other opposition groups. But as far as to the best of my knowledge, I think that the Russian warplanes are bombing the ISIS structures, and they are bombing those extremist groups which are fighting with jihadist purposes.
Jean-Marc Rickli, when you look at the current situation in Syria right now, do you see any possibility of a breakthrough of any kind either militarily or politically?
Well, to have a breakthrough in a political negotiation, you would need to have a concerted effort to put pressure on Assad to negotiate, because at the end of the day, Assad is not ready to negotiate. The only power who has this power to do it, the only country, is Russia. If you think prior to September last year, without the support of Russia, the regime of Assad was likely to fall. If the Russian would be serious about getting a transition or a resolution to the country, they should put a lot of pressure on Assad by threatening to withdraw. What we've seen in the past, especially in March, with the partial withdrawal of Russia, that was not the case. So I think that any diplomatic activities up until that point, where you have to change, if you want, the negotiation strategy of the two camps, up until that time, if no one is able to change, especially Assad, then you won't get to anything. The other side, on the other hand, have the problem of getting to a common position, and this is the whole problem of trying to bring together these different groups. So on both sides, both the US and the Russian should actually work on their allies on the ground. The Russian trying, if they are really committing to a peace process, trying to show that if Assad is not willing to negotiate, then they would leave. That would probably change his incentive, and the Americans should bring together the coalition.
Let's put that then to Samir. I mean, is there? I believe you mentioned earlier that you don't think Russia has much leverage over the Syrian regime. Just explain why you think that. Why you don't think that they could perhaps use their threat to withdraw further as leverage on the regime?
Practically, they are hijacked now by the regime. They came, and they were given lots of hope regarding the seriousness of the Syrian regime vis-a-vis the Geneva I, Geneva II, and we know exactly that there had been some promises given to the Russians, and the Russians spoke about this extensively in our meetings with them, in their meeting with the Americans, saying that they have lots of promises regarding the future of Bashar al-Assad, etc. But practically nothing is being delivered. I don't think this is the Russians are not serious, but I think they, in the current situation, after they came to the country, they became in a way or another, just like, you know, at a certain moment the Americans in Iraq were hijacked by the Iranians because they own the ground. They own the ground. So my point here is that the Russians maybe would like to see a better behavior of Bashar al-Assad, but at the end of the day, when it comes to a brutal attack by the regime, they cannot stop it. And by the attempt of the regime to profit from their presence now in Hmeimim and other areas of Syria, they will continue to do this. And this is not comfortable, of course, for Russia, but I'm very much afraid that if things will last more than that, the Russians will become targeted.
Just one quick final question to Vladimir. Do you see a solution to this in further cooperation between Russia and the US, the two big superpowers here?
I see the opportunities and the possibilities. And in fact, actually, it is very important to cooperate with the United States and to have cooperation between the US and Russia in this vital point. Otherwise, this acute Syrian crisis would be going forever, regardless of what regime will be in power, whether it will be Bashar al-Assad or there will be another leader who couldn't just hold all the country in total, because there is a strong possibility that the Syria could fall apart on different parts. One part will be under ISIS, another part wouldn't be under rule of someone.
All right, on that we are going to have to leave it. Thank you to all three of our guests, Samir El-Taqi in Dubai, Vladimir Sotnikov in Moscow, and Jean-Marc Rickli joining me here in the studio in Doha. And thank you for watching another Inside Story. Again, you can see this program anytime you want by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.